In this segment, we're going to be treating costal or rib dysfunctions. And we're going to start out with the upper ribs, first and second rib, that have anterior tender points. So the first rib has a tender point just underneath that medial clavicular area as the first rib articulates with the manubrium. And that would be the first rib tender point there, tender point on the anterior aspect. And we're going to flex the head up until I get a little bit of folding right around that tender point. Right about there, I feel them start to collapse down. I'm going to turn them and have them kind of almost look to that tender point. And what I'm going to do is hold this for about 30 seconds, reassess it, see if it needs to be fine-tuned. Then I'll hold it for another 60 seconds for a total of 90 seconds. Now, when it comes to ribs, it's written in a number of texts that it's 120 seconds. But Dr. Jones, when he started teaching costal counterstrain and switched from 90 seconds where every other tender point was held, and then went to ribs and switched to 120, was because he didn't think the patients were relaxing very much. And he added 30 seconds just to give them enough relaxation and accommodation to then he could start the technique. So theoretically, if I started this over and said, okay, we found the costal dysfunction, I found a tender point associated with it, and I brought the patient up and I felt the patient was nice and relaxed, etc., and wasn't helping, then there's no reason why clinically you can't hold it for 90 seconds, even though most of the didactic written work says 120 seconds. Now, these anterior tender points are thought to be, in Jones's terminology, depressed ribs. Now, depressed ribs doesn't sound like the inhalation-exhalation varieties we're teaching today. These terms weren't used. So depressed rib would be more similar to what we would explain today as an exhalation dysfunction, where the rib is freer in exhalation. So these anterior tender point treatments for these so-called depressed ribs that Jones called them seem to be exacerbating or taking to the freedom, making it more dysfunctional in terms of its free position, the first or second rib in this position, and I'm actually taking it into an exhalation position. And mostly in this type of positioning through its pump handle motion. A little bit of bucket handle with the side bending, but more the pump handle motion. And slowly bring them back. So that's a first rib in a supine position. Sometimes if you need to get more flexion through this upper back, you can lift up with the head under the neck, or reach this hand under the shoulder and bring it up, or even put a thigh in. But basically it's just flexion with a little side bending and rotation too, so that the patient looks at the dysfunction.